Today is a particularly joyous day because we are so privileged to have Lynn Talbot here with us today. And the other person that you'll find out is part of the origin story of the American Pilgrims on the Camino is Zita Macy, who's here also. Zita, are you?
Come in.
They missed. The fact that we're all here today is due to the good offices of people like Lynn and Zita Macy and other people you'll find out today. Lynn is a harbinger of American pilgrimage. She first walked the Camino Frances in 1974 in a very historic way. She's been back countless times as an individual pilgrim and also a leader of students, both with her family and students. And with her son, she edited a collection of Following the Yellow Arrows, Younger Pilgrims on the Camino. And she's also volunteered in the Pilgrim's office in Santiago. Listen to her words carefully, because this is a good story. Thank you.
Is my microphone on? Oh. Good morning. Hallelujah. I'm so happy to be here. Isn't this a wonderful venue? Yes. It is excellent. I'm always happy to come to the gathering. This is my springtime happy place. And it's almost as good as being on the Camino. Almost, but anyway. I'm here to talk about the history of American Pilgrims on the Camino. First of all, we got to talk about its prehistory. What led to the creation of our organization? Prehistory starts with David Gitlitz, because he was a professor of Spanish at Indiana University, and in 1974, that's 50 years ago, he organized the first medieval studies seminar on the Camino. It was a study abroad program, probably the very first American study abroad program on the Camino. Now you have to remember, 50 years ago, there were no guidebooks, there were no yellow arrows, there were no albergues, and there were no other pilgrims. And there was no walking path to follow. It was just David Gitlitz and 7 students. Now, in that group, we have our second important person in our prehistory. We have Linda Davidson. And 5 years later, David and Linda were now teaching at the University of Nebraska. And there was this very persistent undergraduate student who had learned about the Camino in high school. And she heard about that 1974 trip, and she really wanted David and Linda to lead another trip. Did I say she was persistent? She begged, cajoled, pleaded, implored. I really worked on the thesaurus section to come up with the verbs. And there was a second pilgrimage. And that persistent student was Mary Jane Dunn, who is sitting here in the front row. And I misspelled your name. Dang it, it should be, it's 2 words. It's Mary Jane. I don't know who that guy is in the center, but...
You're right, he is a shepherd.
This was a shepherd who joined with
What is picture taken?
He wanted his picture taken, okay. So David and Linda went on to lead 3 more of these pilgrimage groups on the Camino, 1987, 1993, and 1996. And in 2000, they published this very amazing book. those of us who carried this, and it has everything you have ever wanted to know about the Camino. Dates, description of architecture, flora, fauna, everything that's on the title page there. And those of us who used to carry this book when we were on the Camino would rip out the pages after we walked past something because we wanted to lighten our load. Fortunately, it's now available on Kindle. So if you want to go, be sure to take this with you because you will learn everything, all of the history, everything you need behind what is there on the Camino. It's not just a walking path. And on the front cover, you see someone in red on the very front. That's Mary Jane Dunn. Yay! What? This is Mary Jane right here in the red. Stand up, Mary Jane. So here in this book, you have the three important prehistory figures. So Linda and Mary Jane went on to collaborate on a number of important academic studies about the Camino de Santiago, major contributions to the field. And I hope you all know of this book. It's the first English translation of Book 2 of the Libri Sancti Jacobi. Some of you might know it as the Codex Callistinus or the Book of St. James. And the medieval manuscript was published to promote the cult of St. James. And it recounts the miracles of St. James that were performed on the Camino or people going to the Camino. They're short, they're easy to read, and they are delightful. You will notice that there is a third name. Oh yes, there is a third name on that cover of person Thomas Coffey. He'll be here at the conference tomorrow morning. So be sure and come to his session. And Mary Jane and Tom have recently gone on to translate two other parts of the Liber Sancti Jacobi, the Book 1, which is Sermons and Liturgy of St. James, and then Book 2 and 3, reworking of Book 2 and Book 3. It's the Miracles of St. James in Book 2 and what's called the Translatio of St. James, how St. James ended up in Spain. And the other two books of the Liber Sancti Jacobi have also been translated by others into English, and so now the entire manuscript is available in English, which is very important for people who are interested in the Camino.
And all published by Italica Press.
And all published by Italica Press. We'll give them credit. Okay, in 1988, we're going to... Mary Jane submitted a grant to the Program for Cultural Cooperation between Spain's Ministry of Culture and United States universities. That's quite a title. She wanted to create a newsletter. Does anybody remember newsletters? This is pre-internet. She wanted to create a newsletter for academics interested in the Camino, which would facilitate the rapid exchange of ideas among scholars. She requested $400. It's about $1,000 in dollars today. And her university, Creighton University, contributed a like amount. And here's the first issue. Published on July 25th. What a great date. 1989. The group, she gave a name to the group, Friends of the Road to Santiago, which is a direct translation of Amigos del Camino de Santiago, which is what's used in Spain. And you can clearly tell that this is an academic newsletter. You've got call for papers, upcoming conferences. And I have to say, Mary Jane did all the work at the beginning. She wrote, used the mainframe computer. Some of us remember having to work on mainframe computers. She wrote, she printed, she hand addressed every issue, and then she mailed them. So this was a labor of love for Mary Jane. And Linda Davidson later did help, and she did take over some of the work. So, as I said, this first issue is clearly aimed at academics. But look what happens. 1991, the newsletter has an article called "A Note to the Cautious Prospective Walking Pilgrim." What's happening? People are starting to walk the Camino, and they have information to share, and they have suggestions. Cycling, people are starting to cycle. Equipment list, which guide to take. So by 97, there are starting to appear pilgrim guides. And it's no longer a newsletter for academics, it's a newsletter for us, people like us. 1995, Friends of the Camino de Santiago offers a credential. And if you look at some of those stamps, they're still there. Those are the same stamps that you would get today if you walked the Camino. And as the internet takes off, Friends of the Road created a website in 1999. An archived version of that is still available at that URL. And there's also a listserv, which is a pre-message board, that's what we called them. She started that in 2000. David Huff took it over in 2004 until 2018. It's now archived, and it is fascinating reading to see the kinds of questions that people were asking getting ready to go on the Camino. And what you have here, listserv, website, credential, newsletter, that's what we have today with American Pilgrims. This is where it started. People brought together what we needed to keep in contact. But now to our modern history. This is our gathering founder, Sandy Linthal. Sandy, she walked the Camino in 1995, 1996, and 1997. She came home, and like many of us, found no one with whom to talk about the experience. Other people didn't understand what she had done. And so Sandy organized that first gathering in Williamsburg, Virginia. She announced the gathering in the Friends of the Camino newsletter, so here's the connection. And she sent invitations, personal invitations to those on the newsletter mailing list. So if we had not had a Friends of the Camino newsletter, she would have had no way to get in touch with people who had walked the Camino. And by the way, the name Gathering was suggested by Sandy's husband, Ron. The link there is to a video that she recorded at a gathering several years ago, where she talks about how she founded the gathering, first gathering. And here's the invitation that we received, those of us who were on the mailing list. You probably can't read that, it's probably too small, but guess what they were having? They were having talks on the Camino, there was fellowship, and there was food and wine. Is that any different from what we're doing today? At the first gathering, there were 36 people. 29 were from outside of Virginia. I think that's pretty amazing. And look where they came from. Seattle, San Francisco, New York, Rhode Island. Does that say something about the need that people had to get together and talk about their experience? Did anyone here attend that very first gathering? I know one person who's not here who probably was there, but that's, and I coulda and shoulda. I lived 4 hours away and it seemed too far away to go. Sandy asked participants to think about 3 topics. pilgrimage experiences that you have carried over into your real life. We're still talking about that, aren't we? Could Americans sponsor or befriend a refugio? We called albergues back in those days refugios, the name has changed. And should we organize a second annual gathering? All good topics, weren't they? Well, yes, there was a second gathering. 1 year later in San Francisco, 1999, organized by Lynn. And then Alexandria, Santa Fe, Williamsburg, Columbia, Missouri. There was no organization. This was just a loose group. It grew organically, people who wanted to continue getting together to talk about the Camino. I think that's pretty amazing that just people would say, okay, I'll have a second gathering. So anybody attend any of these gatherings? I was at Alexandria and Williamsburg. Anybody else? Nobody? Oh, Zeta. Well, of course Zeta was there. Zeta organized these. So, of course, Daniel was at some of those. Of course, I can't see from up here. Okay, wow, we got some wonderful. Okay, so until 2004, this is when things really started to happen. First of all, American Pilgrims on the Camino was organized as a charitable, that is, nonprofit organization. Mary Jane and Linda had looked into it, they consulted lawyers, and they were told at the time, and this was back in about 1994, there were not enough people yet to organize that. But by 2004, evidently the groups were, there were more people, and so charitable status is required by the Junta, the government in Galicia, and the confraternity community to be recognized. So this was a very, very important step to become a nonprofit organization. And Friends of the Road to Santiago merged with American Pilgrims. So we really are joined together. That's very important to remember. All of the work that Friends of the Camino did, Friends of the Road to Santiago did, is what was necessary to make American Pilgrims exist today. And we had a first board of directors named. Edie Bennett, Lynn Galea, Kathy Gower, Zita Macy, Steve Peedy, Nicholas Setka, and Michael Wyatt. And those are people who most are not with us here today. So it's important to remember that these are names of people who really participated, started, moved us along. So there was a lot of interest in giving back to the Camino, and one of the most important things that happened is the Hospitalero training. We had here in the 2004 gathering in Santa Barbara, Father Jose Ignacio Diaz, who had set up the albergue in Grañón. Has anyone stayed in Grañón? Yeah, a lot of us have. It's a wonderful place. He came, and Mariluz and Jan Melis, who had the albergue in Eunate, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore, came and trained our first hospitaleros. 2005, we had more people, had again another hospitalero training at the gathering in Toronto. 2006, there was another one in Sacramento. It was just a gathering, hospitalero training without a gathering. And in 2007, Mariluz and Jan said, we can't keep coming. This is too far. They lived in Spain. It was too much. And so Daniel Decay and Lynn Galea took over the hospitalero training. And others who have served as trainers, Frank and Jeanette Chacon, Cheryl Grassman, Ani Arago, Martha Kreitz, Carmen Marriott, Emilio Escudero, and over 750 have been trained over the years. Who's been trained as an hospitalero? Okay, your numbers, you sent me 750. That's why. So it's now, what's the number now?
Closer to 850.
Closer to 850, okay. Wonderful. How have we given back in other ways? Well, we have the Ribadiso Welcome Service. This was organized starting in 2014. The gathering in Belleville, Illinois. Rafael Sanchez, who was director of the Chacobeo at the time, came to the gathering, and he wanted to create a welcome program for pilgrims at the Junta Albergues. Junta Albergues are the public ones. They basically, you go in, you pay your money, you get your bed, and that's it. And he wanted to make it more welcoming. And so American Pilgrims started in spring of 2015 going to Ribadiso, and it continues, except obviously for 2020 or 2021. Who served at Ribadiso? So wonderful. It's a wonderful opportunity. I arrived there and felt, wow, these are my people when I got there. So what else? What do we have? We have a credential. How many people have used their credential? I think we need to remember that Roseanne McCullough, yes, originally handled requests. She sent all of those early credentials out to people who requested them.
And she would have liked to have been here today.
And she would have liked to have been here today. But health issues have kept her away today. It's now handled by an agency. Why? Because we issued 9,300 credentials last year. So now we have a website, just like Friends did. Jean McCullough was webmaster for many, many years. These are people who have, yes, and I'm sure all of us have used that website. It's very important. What else have we done? We have a Facebook page, and I don't know how many thousands of people. Do we have a moderator here? I don't know. There are like thousands and thousands of people. Maybe
over 39,000.
Over 39,000. Many of them aren't even members of American Pilgrims, but we're sharing what we know with those people who are going to be walking the Camino. We have La Concha, a quarterly magazine. It looks so professional now. All of you have done such a terrific job. I should have the names of all the moderators for the Facebook page, because you do a wonderful job. Should have all the people who worked on La Concha, because that's a labor of love as well for people. And keep remembering the grants program. Remember, they started 1998. Should we have our own refugio, like the Brits do, like the Germans do, like the Italians do? And I think wiser heads prevailed. Can you imagine trying to run an albergue from the US? But we can give back. We have lots of albergues, and it's our way of giving back. We don't have an albergue, but we help lots of albergues. Obviously, the website says our mission is to support the Camino infrastructure, and we do. We have awarded more than $579,000 in grants. And they're not large grants, but they're grants that make a difference. And we have supported more than 120 projects in Spain, France, and Portugal. And this is a picture off of our website, I think. The albergue in San Roque de Albolodui on the Camino Mozárabe, they've even got a painting, a mural of our, up there on the wall, of our logo, thank you. So, you know, we don't have to deal with bureaucracy of setting up an albergue, the distance, the cost, whatever, but we are helping out there. And I would like to thank lots of people who've helped me put this presentation together. I've been very grateful. I've gotten lots of people sending me emails, and I'd like to recognize Annette Argel, Daniel Decay, Mary Jane Dunn, Kathy Gower, George Greenia, and Zita Macy, who provided all of the information. And the journey continues. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and maybe there may be some discussion, and I know Tom has some projects that he'd like to talk about as well. So questions, comments?
Specifics, do you have a favorite book for the Portuguese?
A favorite guidebook?
Yes.
No. You know, more than anything, I like, if I had a favorite one, I would have the map book. You don't, I mean, if you wanted the history, but I don't think I don't have a guidebook that gives lots of history. I just want to know how to walk, but then I look things up if I want to know the history of a place. Because the Gitlis Davidson Complete Guide to the Camino is only on the Francés, so it does not go beyond that. Yes?
Do we have stats on how many pilgrims go to the Camino route in the last 20 years?
I can't give you for the last 20 years, but stats on the number of pilgrims on the Camino, it's going up. I mean, you know, we had Shirley MacLaine's book on the way. The Camino? Yeah. And then we had Martin Sheen's film, and the numbers of Americans have gone up. We were the largest group of non-Spaniards on the Camino this past year. So I think it was like 23,000. 32. Lots of Americans.
Oh.
I don't have this. But there were a lot of us on the Camino last year, yes. Christine.
What was the day in the life back in the 1970s of walking along the Camino? Can you describe a day?
Just stop at a cafe every hour.
I did a whole presentation on that 15 years ago. We would get up in the morning.
Put on our blue jeans.
Put on
and our
blue-
sweatshirts.
Our sweatshirts and our hiking boots. I mean, like boots. If you look at the pictures, they were boots. And we would ask. Let's say we were in Puente La Reina. We would ask somebody on the street, is there a back road that we could use to get to Sirauki? Because that's sort of the first little, or Maniero, first little town. And they say, no, you gotta walk on the highway. So off on the highway, literally walking on the side of the highway. And then after a little while, we'd see a shepherd and say, how would you go to Sirauki from here? And he'd say, well, there's this dirt path. And so we'd go take it. And sometimes we'd get there, and sometimes we'd get lost. David Gitlitz had managed to get topo maps from the Spanish army. He had some sort of a enchufe, some sort of an inn. And so he had all of these topo maps rolled up. So anyway, we'd walk, he would use those, we'd try and figure that out. But it was literally talking to people, farmers, shepherds, whatever, getting along the way. And then one person had to drive the car. We had a support car because in that first trip, Indiana University required us to have a library with us.
This is an academic trip.
The library was a cardboard box with 5 big books in it. That was it, but we had a library. And so we had, there's no way we were going to carry books with us. So we did not carry all of our belongings. We had day packs. And we would stop along the way. If there was an important church, we'd be standing in front of the church analyzing whatever was there. And so the person who drove ahead had the obligation of finding us a place to stay, finding food for us, either a restaurant or else finding a lady who might cook dinner for us.
And sometimes we had to go drive someplace to buy enough groceries within a town to
Yeah,
have
you-
enough food for 8 extra people.
They would not necessarily, and I mean, we ate some pretty basic meals like fried eggs and potatoes for dinner with the bread that had been gotten that day. And then, so where were we going to stay? Well, we had a variety of accommodations. David had written down every single parish priest where he thought we would stop. And so we were instructed to go find the parish priest. And maybe he would have arranged something. But we stayed in schools, slept on the floor of the schools that were out for the year, slept in convents, hay stacks. In Torres del Rio, we slept in somebody's hay barn, and we slept in a hay barn in Fonseveron. And if nothing else was available, we'd stay at an hostal. But he did understand we needed some luxury, and there was a historical connection. We stayed in the Parador in Santo Domingo de la Calzada. We stayed in San Marcos in León, and we stayed in Hostal de los Reyes Católicos in Santiago.
Those were also our mail drops.
Oh yes, so those were also our mail drops. That's where we could tell our families to send. No, but that was in the days of, there was no other communication. So it was very, you get up in the morning, you eat, you walk, you find a place to stay, and you go. I mean, it was very much like today, except that it was much more basic.
So how many days? Yeah, how many days?
We weren't walking day by day, so we'd get to Pamplona and spend 2 or 3 days looking at all the churches, visiting the museums. So I left the end of May 31st, I think was the first day, and we got into Santiago in early August.
Oh, okay. That's a lot of fun.
We had 36 walking days, but we were gone
3 months.
52 days. So we were 52 days on the Camino, but only 36 of them were actually walking.
And because we had a van, actually we had one of those red and gray VW buses. Remember those? And so we would drive off the Camino to go. We went to Zamora and looked at all the churches in Zamora, and we went up into the hills and saw those Visigothic churches that you can't get to walking. So there were amazing experiences. I remember we've gone off to see the Roman mines at Las Médulas, which are on the Camino de Invierno, very amazing looking place. And as we were driving back to where we were spending the night, he goes, slammed on the brakes, VW bus, and goes, there's Cornatel. Well, Cornatel is a castle that appears in a 19th century novel called El Señor de Bembibre. And so we made our way up there, just ruins on top of the hill, and he knew obviously that we were going to be there because he had a copy of the book. And there's this amazing scene where these people were climbing up the cliff to get into the castle to attack it. And so we sat there and read that. There's so many special memories like that from that 1974 trip. And I can talk way too much about
Did you get a Compostela?
And we did get a Compostela. There were 108 Compostelas awarded in 1974. 8 of them belonged to us.
When did you come up with these stamps and get people to have the stamps available as you walk for the?
I don't know when the stamps came. I mean, we know by 95 there were stamps.
So there was a conference in Jaca in 1986. Thank you. Yeah. Where's our Estella friends? They could tell us. Maxi, ¿dónde estás? ¿Cuándo empezaron con los sellos?
En 1960 nosotros creamos la primera credencial.
Okay, so in the 60s, Estella, which is the oldest confraternity still running in Spain, y'all should get to know Maxi and his Javier and Sebastian, ¿están? So they kept it going in the 60s and the 70s, but then there was a conference. Esta conferencia en Jaca, ¿en qué año fue?
En el 85.
85. Okay, so in 85, and that's when they started. There's a picture on the cover of Peregrino magazine, and it's a picture of a pallet in basically a barn, and it was a refugio, and it's stamped across the front of it in big yellow letters. It said, "De vergüenza." It's shameful how we were treating the pilgrims.
En 1972 nosotros hicimos la primera también cartografía que algunas hemos traído para sortearlas aquí del Camino 1972.
Okay, so 72 was the first cartography publications of the Camino, but they were limited to Estella Group.
Y una curiosidad, que el albergue de Estella en 1979 era el calabozo de la policía.
In 1979, the Pilgrims Hostel was the jailhouse. And I have to say, so in my group, we stayed in the jail in Sarria. Sat there and drank all night, singing. There was the jailer had, I want to say it was tequila. We were shooting something. It was awful. Aguardiente, probably. Or orujo. Anyway, but he had a guitar, and David had been, when he had stayed in Spain, he was a member of Atuna. Atuna is the people that in the medieval costumes that play in Santiago, right? You've heard them? So he was a member, so he knew all these songs. So the two of them started singing, playing guitar, and then drinking all night in the jailhouse in Sarria.
And so there's another, one of those memories that could only have happened. Way back then.
Way back when, yeah.
So no jailhouse? We can't say the jailhouse?
I have a picture somewhere.
Were a lot of the major stops for the beginning of the road starting at St. John Peter Park, was that already established in the 60s and the 70s?
What we were using, and I think what probably most people would have been using, and I think the guidebooks today, it's the same thing. It goes back to the 12th century to the Codex Calixtinus, because the book 5 was a guidebook, and it names the major stops. Now it was written, they aren't really sure, because some of the distances are like 60 kilometers, which obviously people, maybe not, maybe they would have walked that, I don't know. We do have occasionally run across people who are, walking 40, 50, 60 kilometers a day. Not me. It was already established. The historical route was known, and a lot of historical work had been done on the medieval Camino. And so that's what the Camino today more or less follows. It's not perfect, because what did they do when they started paving roads? They paved right over what was the original Camino, because that's where people,
The original Camino was there since the 2nd century, because the Romans built roads all the way. And so all this whole, we're going to Finisterre to the end of the world. Now, you were going to Iria and Padron because the Romans needed to get their gold and their silver and everything to the port. So it was very functional. And so the Roman roads are still there. There's a few places, Santo Domingo